Hi everyone, this is Andrea Magdalena, and I'm the founder of She Said So. In the past, I worked with creative agencies, startups, and brands at the intersection of art, culture, and technology. So I have a little bit of experience in the branding world, digital world, as well as in the music industry. For those of you who might be new to She Said So, it's a global network of women and gender minorities in the music industry. I created it in London back in 2014, and fast forward 7 years, at the moment, our community comprises of more than 15,000 members worldwide across 17 local chapters. Some of those local chapters include countries like Spain, Italy, France, but also some of them are cities like Berlin, LA, and New York. And we've been working with the British Council, Oi Futuro, and Lighthouse as part of Arte Sónica Amplificada, or ASA as we call it, for this is our third year. I'm very excited to be back as part of this program. It's one of the most impactful programs that She Said So has been a part of so far. So, a huge thanks to our partners for making us a part of it, and very excited that we were able to bring it back after the pandemic in a hybrid format. So I guess this is why I'm here today to record this video focused on branding. Unfortunately, I cannot deliver it to you as an in real life workshop. So hopefully this will do, and hopefully we will get the chance to meet as part of a networking event or in some other way very soon as well. If you have any questions about this workshop, you're also more than welcome to reach out to me directly. All right, so let's jump into it. Brand. What is a brand? At this point, I would usually ask you to do a little exercise with me and help me identify the definition of a brand. Now, you can pause the video right here and still do the exercise completely on your own. Just pause the video and try to think about it. Try to give it your own definition. There is no wrong answer, so it's mostly an exercise that's supposed to, you know, train your brain muscle a little bit and force you to think about it. So, anyway, assuming you stopped the video for a little bit, I'm gonna tell you a little bit more about the official definition. So, originally, the term brand was used for referring to the mark that cattle ranchers branded on their cattle. The idea of a brand has evolved to encompass so much more than that over time, of course, much more than a name or a symbol. But that's kind of the origin of it all. So there are multiple definitions. As I said, there is no right or wrong answers. At its core, your brand is what your consumers, your fans, or your customers know about you. Branding pro Martin Neumeyer, he's an expert in the branding space. He defines a brand identity as, and I quote, the outward expression of a brand, including its trademark, name, communications, and visual appearance. A brand identity is the sum total of how your brand looks, feels, and speaks to people. Sometimes that even includes how it sounds, tastes, feels, and even smells. And in your case, since we're dealing with the music industry, obviously the way it sounds plays a very big role. If you're a music artist or a sound creator of some sort, you might be an executive or an aspiring creative in the music industry and you don't deal with sound. Maybe your output is something visual. Maybe your output is a podcast. Well, there's sound involved in that as well. Or maybe your output is a piece of writing. It's the sum total of all those different elements, depending on what your output product is, that defines, that makes up the brand of that very thing. And it could be a thing, it could be a group of services, it could be an individual. So let's keep going and continue exploring. These are some of the most recognizable brands in the world. In fact, according to many research studies over the years, these three came out to be some of the most beloved brands in the world as well. Sometimes not so much the most beloved, but definitely the most recognizable. So at this point, I would ask you to stop the video again and do another little exercise, and that is list three things that makes these brands memorable to people. All right, pause the video and have a go. Again, there's no right or wrong. It's just a way for you to learn by discovery. It's actually the Harvard model, where they force you to think about the very thing you're trying to learn by uh, trying to give it an answer first on your own. All right, assuming you've done this, you've gone through the exercise, let's try one of these completely on our own. I'm going to skip Google because some of the brand elements that we associate with Google are, excellent quality, best companies to work for. I think Google won that award a few years in a row back in 2014, 2015. Since then, I'm not sure if it's still the same. The situation is still the same, but we can, talk about Coca-Cola. For example, what's the most recognizable thing about Coca-Cola? It's the font and it's the red color. And little fun fact that the font hasn't really changed in a really long time. It's a timeless font. The taste itself, the product itself, hasn't changed since 1903, when a certain illegal substance was removed from the original recipe as an ingredient. The logo itself makes it an extremely recognizable brand, as I was saying. The proprietary bottle that is unique to Coca-Cola, right? Like when you see that old school sort of glass bottle, you think instantly Coca-Cola. In fact, my parents used to have a shop back in Romania, and brands like Coca-Cola would send small shops little fridges or other promotional material that they could put up around their stores. And I remember very vividly a poster from the 90s that had, it was actually a calendar that had all sorts of photos from all over the world that looked like the shape of a Coke bottle, So their branding team clearly knew that the bottle is a recognizable and proprietary element to the Coca-Cola brand, and they definitely made use of it in marketing materials. Coca-Cola has a voice and a personality. Coke doesn't just sell a drink in a bottle. It sells happiness in a bottle, and you will probably recognize that many of their advertisements, many of their ads, whether they were in print or in TV, were trying to express exactly that very feeling of happiness, associating Coca-Cola with joy. Other things that are extremely recognizable about this brand, its very slogan, for example, always Coca-Cola, taste the difference. It's the slogan itself, the byline can be another, very important element within your brand. Maybe less so if you're an artist, but definitely if you're building a record label, a magazine, a podcast series, you have to give it a tagline. And sometimes that may be shorter, like a slogan. Sometimes that may be a little longer, like a sentence that succinctly and clearly describes you, your brand. All right, I won't do the other exercises with Google and Nike, but a quick Google search will enable you to quickly find the answer. and do a bit more branding exercises with those two names. All right, one thing that I would love to clarify from the start is that a brand is not equal to a logo, right? So I think a lot of people make that mistake. I'm not sure what that plus there is doing, but ignore, please. The term brand and logo are often used interchangeably, but even though a logo can be the symbol of a business, it is not the entirety of a brand, right? In fact, creating a logo is just one small step towards developing a strong brand identity. With billions of people and businesses trying to make a name out of themselves out there, especially in this crowded space that we live in today, thanks to social media, having a strong brand has become crucial in order to differentiate ourselves from our competitors. So, if you're working to develop your first brand identity for yourself as an artist, or you're doing this for a new project or a business, it's important to understand what a brand is and what it takes to create one. Um, there are some accidental brands out there that just happen to, become successful. But you should know that a majority of companies, in particular, pay agencies or consultants like myself a lot of money to help them define and maintain their brand. So this workshop is relevant to you regardless of whether you're trying to develop a brand for yourself as an individual or a brand for your project or for your company. I am not necessarily a huge fan of Jeff Bezos, but this quote from him is something that, really resonates with me. I think it's really powerful. Branding is what people say about you when you're not in the room, right? Especially if you're a company, especially if you have a project, you want people to find it very easily to describe what it is, and it's the very small details in most cases that stick with people and make people memorize brands or make brands memorable. Branding is something that creates trust, between the consumer or the fan and something that isn't tangible. It's the very bridge between the product that you're selling, the brand itself, and the person who's consuming it. Um, a strong brand creates instant recognition in the marketplace, especially amongst your fans or customers. All right, so let's keep digging. Let's try and figure out exactly, what is this brand thing? A brand identity is made up of what your brand says, what your values are, how you communicate your product, and then again, your product can be you with your entirety of, things that define you, or it could be your music, or it could be whatever it is that your output is. Um, you definitely want people to feel something when they interact with it, and that very feeling is exactly, part of what defines your brand. Essentially, your brand identity is the personality of your business or of your product or of your artist persona. In some cases, artists like to create a completely different persona for when they're on stage versus who they are in their personal lives. Sometimes they're exactly the same person. It's completely up to you. There's no wrong or right answer again here as well. Um, all right, some more thoughts here is that, nowadays fans and consumers have become so involved in their favorite brands that they really help tell that brand story. And that is especially happening with artists because it's so easy for artists to connect with people in a way that companies aren't able to. As an artist, you can go live from your Instagram account and establish a very intimate connection with your fans when you do so. As a company, you have to work a lot harder to create that genuine, or as a project, again, as a non-human, you will find it a lot more difficult to create that connection, that genuine connection um, with your consumers, with your customers. But having said that, it doesn't mean that it's impossible. Many companies have done it very successfully. For example, Chanel, a brand that we are all familiar with, um, and one that hasn't visually changed, if I'm not mistaken, since the very beginning. At the very least, I know the logo itself hasn't changed since its very first iteration, which is quite incredible. Ultimately, a brand identity is a way to communicate with the world, differentiate yourself from competition, and create a brand experience that encourages people to engage with you. Now, research suggests that the average person is exposed to upwards of 5,000 brand messages per day. So, how exactly do you stand out? Let's look at Chanel, for example. Um, Chanel's tagline is "A girl can be two things, classy and fabulous." Now, you may not agree with this statement, but you have to agree that it's a really powerful one. And so, Coco Chanel initially, and then the team that followed her, are really, taking this statement to heart. And so, what are some of the words that you would use to describe Chanel? Wealth, elegance, classic, sophistication, um, the little black dress, and even their perfumes, and clothing, the Chanel suit, Chanel perfume number 5. Those are products that interpret the sheer simplicity, anticipation, liberation, and sophistication of the brand. They embody them. Some of the most successful music artists in the world have built an extremely strong brand for themselves. So let's look at one of the most successful artists out there, Beyonce. Obviously, she's one of the most recognizable artists in the world for a variety of reasons. We love Beyonce for for what her brand is primarily, and then some of us maybe like her for who she is on a personal level, although probably many of us don't actually have that insider access. So most of us develop this relationship with the persona that the artist has developed to engage with the public. So, anyway, to recap, if you want your brand to succeed and thrive in the future, you need to build a brand identity that accurately conveys your essence and is flexible enough to evolve with you. That's another important aspect, right? Beyonce started off as a member of a girls' band, Destiny's Child, and over time, she has evolved herself as an artist, as an individual on a personal level. She has evolved creatively and visually, sonically, to a point where you constantly feel like she's always ahead of the game. And why is that? Because, well, a variety of reasons, but my theory is that one of them is because, from a branding perspective, Beyonce has always uh, gone for, excellence, quality. So, what would we identify Beyonce's brand? What are some of the other words? And again, here you can pause the video. But if you really think about it, or think about what this image says to you, this image alone, um, her fans gave her the nickname Queen Bey, right? She is the manifestation of what a real queen represents. And gradually, her look, her lyrics, and her body language even started expressing that as well. If you were to look back in time at, Beyonce's transformation in the public eye, you will see her gaining more and more confidence and more of this queen persona um, to the point where she became Queen Bey for everyone. She wasn't any of those things when she was a member of Destiny's Child, for example. But we kind of all sense that out of the three performers, she's definitely the one that stands out the most. All right, now that we've kind of explored what a brand is, what it could potentially mean for a person, what it could potentially mean for a project or a company or an initiative, let's explore the different steps that we must take in order to get to the point where we define our brand. And like with everything, there is always a process. There's a process in place to help you figure that out. There are, as I said, there are experts out there who are being paid a lot of money to figure this out. So no one is expecting you to be a branding expert. However, going through these steps will certainly help you um, have fun with the process and maybe even come up with, expert results. All right, so let's jump in. Step one. The first step is always research, investigation, and here you have to really try and figure out to define who you are and what you do. Or if it's a project, again, you have to identify what that project is, what that company or product or service is, and what it does. You know who you are and what you do, but how do you do it differently compared to someone else? What's your unique selling proposition, or USP as marketers call it? What type of service do you offer that other people or companies don't? And again, you can play this exercise. You can ask yourselves the very same questions, regardless of whether you refer to yourself as an individual or your project. If you're an artist, how is your music different than other producers or other songwriters? Um, it doesn't matter what business you're in, you will always have to find that connection. You will have to start with the why and the what and the hows. So some early questions are: who am I? What do I sound like? What do I look like? What type of emotions does my work want to convey? What's special about me? And most importantly, why am I doing this? Asking yourself why is an incredible way to, do some internal digging and identify answers to questions that you might not even have before asking yourself this question. So if you're looking to build a brand around yourself as an artist or your band or your business, ask yourself these questions. Write down the answers in a notebook and keep adding to it over time. You will thank yourself if you do this, because it will help you figure out how to shape your brand so that it reflects you and your values. To set yourself up for success, it's important to complete your strategy exercise. So, in the branding space, this investigation would be called discovery, a process of discovery, or a process of strategy. And as a result, you will be able to understand your brand's core values, your brand voice, your brand messaging. It's the communications around it. And in some cases, you'll be able to find taglines, value proposition, um, all of these more official terms in the branding world that companies would typically involve in order to define their brand. For example, I wanted to look at a collective that's, from Brazil. They're called Batecu. They're an LGBTQ plus community of individuals who are based in Sao Paulo. Some of them are DJs, some of them are dancers, some of them are stylists, creatives, and what brings them together is their passion for all these creative things, as well as their belonging to the LGBTQ plus community. And so that alone is an incredible example of how a collective of humans were able to bring forth in a celebratory way, and in a way that helps them define their brand. Some internal values or characteristics that not only help us identify our brand, but they are inherent to who we are. And you can play that into defining your brand in a way that, let's say, a company would not be able to. So, going back to this idea of asking yourself those questions as as an exercise, don't be afraid to really dig deep and make use of the characteristics that maybe you might find scary to start with. Maybe you might find too personal, maybe you might find too intimate, or maybe you might find them to be a negative. Um, as part of this branding exercise, the process of investigation, you might even be able to get to a point where the very things that you used to consider as weaknesses all of a sudden become ammunition for you, become strong brand values that really shape who you are and are able to tell the story of why you're unique to the outside world. All right, so the first process is investigation. That was the first one. The second one is visualization. And that is because people are visual humans, and the very first thing that they interact with, the very first impression that they have of a person or of a project is a visual one. Not only that, but in the social media world that we live in at the moment, we tend to consume and communicate content mostly through a visual spectrum. Having said that, of course, as a reminder, it's important to remind ourselves that your brand is not limited to the visual identity. However, it's undeniable that the visual identity plays a big part in what that brand is. All right, so your identity is both a first impression and a lasting consumer association. A successful brand identity communicates as much information about the brand as possible in less than a second. You have to remember, we now have maybe 2 seconds before someone else is about to scroll on to the next thing. So you really have to do your best to visually capture the viewer in that very first second or two. And so, how do you do that? Through the visual cues that you choose to make up your brand with, your logo, the typefaces you choose, the imagery and content in your advertising and marketing, the clothes that you wear, the accessories you put on, your hair and nails, especially if you're a creative, if you're an artist, all of that public facing component of your brand constitute your visual brand identity. It is vital that there is a harmonious relationship between your identity and the product that you offer. If you use an abstract, difficult to read font to sell, I don't know, dishwashing detergent, you're most likely going to confuse and alienate consumers rather than converting them into fans or customers. You know, dishwashing detergent is something very basic that should be very affordable, that has a very practical use, and that has a place in every kitchen in the world. And so the color codes, the type font, the entire brand, visual identity of the dishwashing detergent should reflect exactly those values. It's necessary to take a thoughtful aesthetic approach to developing the identity of your brand. So, what is the visual language that you can use, that you want to use in order to communicate the messages that you want your fans to receive? How can that be condensed into something that can be understood within that very first second or two? That is a great question. It's $1 million question. But first, let's try and define again more clearly what your visual brand identity consists of, how it manifests. And again, It's these are some of the components. It's not an exhaustive list, and at the same time, you don't need to touch and develop on all of these different elements. But some of them include logo, colors, typography, or the font that you use. Your flyers. As an artist, I'm sure you constantly have to post flyers about the various events that you'll be performing at or speaking at. The photography and illustrations that you use, the creative direction in your videos, and just overall in your album artwork, for example. Styling, the clothes that you wear, again, hair and makeup, merchandise, your social media content, your website design. All of these are visual elements that together make up your visual brand identity. Once you've remember that first step, the investigation, usually as part of a typical branding exercise, once you've identified the answers to those questions, the next step from here is to look out into the world for inspiration. You know, this could be magazines, this could be online content. I mean, you name it. Especially on the internet nowadays, you can go into a spiral of, you know, content discovery across all sorts of forums and blogs and YouTube and other platforms like that, scouring for inspiration. Once you have that vision of what, you know, in your own words, what the brand identity would be like. Well, how would you sound like? How would you look like, and so on. It's time to start using those things that you found from your inspiration, from your research, and put them all together in what we call mood boards. So you'll see here that each of these screens here constitutes a mood board that's based around a certain aesthetic. So, for example, here you will see the this someone is probably trying to come up with a mood board for a music videos that has a 1990s aesthetic. This is kind of what I can intuit. I can see some you know, musicians here playing guitar, smashing their guitar. There's definitely a bit of a punk rock element here. You know, the colors are a bit dark. There's a lot of black and white. There's guitar, rock and roll, boys, you know, hair fluttering in the air. Together, these images make up the 1990 aesthetic. And together, these images make up the mood board for your process of identifying of defining your visual identity. Other things that you should keep in mind are colors, right? So this is extremely important and widely used in advertising and marketing, maybe less so by music artists unless, you know, well, actually, that's not true. Some music artists are extremely visual storytellers as well, and for them, the creative direction is just as important as the music. But if you're not one of those artists, or if you're not one of those entrepreneurs who you know, is in charge of the creative direction, it's important for you to know some of the basic psychology um, rules of colors in brands. So, red typically expresses an emotion of strength, passion, and excitement. And from a marketing perspective, it's being used extensively in the food industry to trigger appetite. So, McDonald's, right? That's kind of what comes to mind alongside the yellow. Yellow would indicate intellect, joy, energy, and in marketing, it's being used to convey positivity, high energy, and optimism. It's supposed to stimulate creativity and attract consumer attention. Blue, on the other hand, expresses loyalty, trust, and intelligence. And a lot of tech companies, you'll notice that use blue because it communicates um, loyalty and precision and high quality. And lastly, green, these are just the primary colors. As an emotion, it expresses freshness, growth, and safety. And in marketing, it's considered as the easiest color for human vision. Maybe because we're so used to it, you know, in time, in our human evolution, we probably used to be surrounded by a lot of greenery. And so it's a color that the human eye is very familiar with. In small side fact, in 2006, a University of Winnipeg study found that people judge products within 90 seconds, and between 60 and 90% of that assessment is based on colors. So if that happens with product, we already spoke about how we only have a second or two on social media, for example, to grab people's attention. You really need to use all the ammunition you have to try and strike that long-lasting impression with your viewers from the get-go. These are some logos or very recognizable images. And again, you can pause this video and try and guess. This one's very obvious, obviously, Wu-Tang. This one's Rolling Stones and oh my goodness. Okay, it's escaping me. Of course, I know it, but it's one for you guys to try and recognize because it's escaping me right now and I'm running out of time. So, although the logo is not the entirety of the brand identity, it is a vital element in the branding process. It's one of the most recognizable parts of your brand. As I said, some music artists have their own brands. If you're not an individual, if you're trying to build a brand around your company, for example, then having a logo is probably very important because you will need to put that logo on a lot of marketing materials, and that's the best way versus your name. So, as I said, many artists don't have a logo, and that's okay. Others found a very clear way of capturing their core visual identity into one succinct logo, which they can then leverage in visuals at live shows or on merchandise. So Shy Girl, that's her logo here behind her, 3D looking, kind of silverish. It says, it says a lot about her as a music artist, her brand, her body positivity, so her association with body positivity and sexuality, and as a woman taking control of your own body to do as you please with it. And then, funnily enough, so she's a good example of someone who has managed to leverage a logo as part of her brand identity. But she's also someone who's breaking the rules. Her most recent release with Slow Tie, Blue, her posters were using a very different font for her name than the one that she's established as part of her logo. So the font that they chose here is actually the font that was chosen by the creative director for this release campaign alone. Oftentimes, that raises a very good point. Artists adopt a different image or a different, visual universe for every release in order to create that sort of mini world that visually expresses the messaging behind that specific piece of music. In order to get to that expression, they often employ the same process we are going through here. They start with a strategy exercise, research, asking the why, and then they move on to creating mood boards and so on. Another example of an artist that I love to give is MC Ta. I hope I'm pronouncing her name correctly. I actually discovered her at Sim Sao Paulo in 2019 or 2018. So prior to the pandemic, and I was very impressed with her performance, her music, and her presence on stage. And my understanding is that she's an independent artist. My understanding is that she works with friends to develop her creative direction. And my understanding is that in her music and in her personal life, she is someone who is connected to her indigenous roots and is always bringing that forth into in however way she can. And in this case, you'll see that it's this image here somehow visually expresses this idea of uh, her being a warrior queen. There's, even though I don't have a good understanding of the very specific indigenous roots, I can kind of see the connection there. I can see a bit of a tribal styling that alludes to her, to her origins. And in this image here, you will see that yes, there is a strong homage played to her roots. Maybe this skirt and this veil here are good indicators of that, and maybe the candle itself kind of expresses that idea of sanctity. But then that's in juxtaposition with these slacks here, these beach shoes, and the very modern cap and sunglasses. So that to me tells me that this artist is someone who is both in touch with her indigenous roots or her roots, period, as well as someone who is, extremely modern and blends the two worlds, perhaps in her music. Maybe, maybe that's what it's communicating. So anyway, these are just some examples of how, visually we can communicate feelings, we can communicate who we are, we can communicate even why we're doing it. Like, for example, this artist here in particular, by choosing this sort of visual styling, she's telling us that those are the things that are important to her. She's telling us why, she's telling us that this is who we are, and that's the very thing that what she wants to communicate to us. The oxymoronic blend of new and old that you might also be able to hear in her music. Last but not least, I just wanted to share a couple of examples of free tools that you can use to make your own logo with. I'm a huge fan of Canva in particular because it's also a tool that we use internally at She Said So to create our social media assets. It's super fun to use. You don't need to be a designer. Again, in an ideal world, this is usually something that companies and even record labels pay a lot of money for. But if you have just a little bit of visual intuition and you're completely limited by resources, then Canva and other free tools like Canva will be a great way for you to be able to build your own brand for free or definitely in a very cheap way. All right, the next step from here is communication. The personality of your brand is the psychic manifestation of your brand's identity. If your brand was a person, who would it be? And again, this is a bit different for someone who's trying to identify their brand as an individual versus a company or an initiative. Let's assume for a second that you, as an individual, you would like to create a separate brand persona to your artist versus who you are in your day-to-day personal life. You know, what is the difference between that artist persona and you? Um, who is that other person? What do they think like? What do they talk like? Excuse me. What effect do they have on the people around them? What kind of language do they use to communicate with others? Is it and does it have an intellectual voice, a conceptual, abstract identity, or is it plain and more down to earth and more speaking to the people? Is it aspirational or is it humble? Those are all questions to ask yourself so that you can identify how you can express, how you can communicate with words who you are and what your brand is. Papia Judah, this is an example of an artist, UK artist, who is whose music is really good. Actually, I encourage you to check it out. She plays, I would call it alternative R&B, soulful, jazzy, kind of UK jazz music. However, her brand is very youthful, I would say a bit more on the urban side, streetwear, fresh and youthful, whereas her music sounds quite timeless and quite mature. Uh, Here in these two examples, I was trying to showcase how in her Instagram posts, for example, she um, created her own sort of Instagram language. Typically, she doesn't post more than a sentence or two with every post, and she always uses a minimum of one emoji, usually more emojis. Um, Usually ending it in a question or some sort of other call to action. So, something like, are you ready? Hit me up if let me know in your comments what you need. Tell me what I should be, what song should I be performing at my next show, things like that. So she's constantly engaging with her copywriting in order to, build that connection with her fans. So if you're a singer-songwriter, it may well be that the tone of voice you're using in your lyrics manifests in your interpersonal communication as well. Or it might not, it's totally up to you. In Poppy's case, for example, I would say that her lyrics are a lot more um, filled with emotion than her copywriting on social media is. On the other hand, someone like Arlo Parks, for example, she's extremely poetic. She's a poet first and foremost, a lyricist before she's a performer, and so typically in her communication, including in writing, so captions to her Instagram posts, for example, or spoken words as part of her video when she's trying to communicate something, they she would typically employ a similar lyricism, a similar poetry to how she talks with her fans, or with journalists who are interviewing her, or whenever she's out and about interacting in the world. I actually had the opportunity to meet her in person, and so I'm able to confirm that. And another thing I wanted to draw your attention to here, real quick, is you will see here that there is obviously a brand, a visual identity established for this release, for her album release. There's a theme going on here of simplicity, of being at home, DIY, that is being brought to life in her vinyl, in her CD. I'm not sure what this thing, a cassette. Um, and it's being expressed in slightly different ways. But again, her lyricism is being brought into the fold from a visual perspective on her CD cover right here. So again, this idea that, Arlo Parks as an artist is a poet, that for her as an artist, the lyricism, the lyrics themselves carry so much weight. That is visually expressed through all of those words that are added here and maybe even here in her visual artwork. All right. Once you've established your, brand voice, your tone of voice, and so on, you have to identify the brand channels that you will be using to communicate. Your brand's channels are the ways your fans reach you and you reach them. The places, the platforms, and the technology. Your website is a perfect place to familiarize people with your branding, for example, like we've seen earlier with Arlo Parks. It is a place to consolidate the messages, identity, aesthetic, and other vibe related elements of your brand. In every way, your content is your brand online. It's your salesperson, your store, your marketing department, it's your story. And every piece of content you publish reflects on and defines your brand. So, great content, great brand. Boring content, boring brand. This is quote from someone that I whose name I can't remember, whose name I cannot find anymore, but a powerful message to keep in mind. All right, so whatever channel you use, it should really reflect your brand personality. The images that you use and the videos that you upload to Instagram, your music videos, the visual design of your website, your words, your copywriting, and so on. They should all communicate your identity and aesthetic. The functionality of your website should give your fans or your customers a chance to interact with your brand in whatever ways can best be enabled by web experience. How you style your copy in your social media posts, as I was saying earlier, the emojis that you use, the tone of voice, all of these are opportunities to moderate the associations that you want your fans or your consumers to make with your brand. Find your voice and stick to it while reserving a certain level of flexibility so that you can adapt your brand with the times and with yourself or your project as you evolve together. Remember that Beyonce example where, she started off as a member of a girl band and then eventually evolved herself creatively and personally to the point where she became Queen Bey. So at the same time, as she transformed, there was something core Beyonce that we never lost, whether it was her voice or her commitment to, the best performance, the best music, and the most positive messaging for her fans. Some of those core elements stayed, whilst she reserved a certain kind of flexibility that she then employed to adapt and evolve over time. This is an example of a grid taken from New York Times Gender, their Instagram account. And I just wanted to showcase a variety of media types, single use, single photo upload. This is a photo series, a carousel. They have a video here, they have an illustration, they have a quote post, they have a quote post with the photo in the background. So generally, this is more digital marketing, Instagram, type of tips and tricks. And I won't go into that into a lot of detail because it's an entire there's an entire workshop just about that. But generally speaking, leveraging a variety of media types, both on your Instagram and in other outlets, while preserving some sort of a consistent branding, is something that I would encourage everyone to do. And all of this content is relatively easy to create with a variety of free photo and design applications out there, like Canva is a good example, Unfold, Splice. And not only that, but they help you create content that is specifically optimized for each social media platform, regardless of the one that you choose. Um, and again, as I wanted to, showcase and stress out that it's so important that you choose, the platform that works for you. So, for example, going back to Arlo Parks, um, I knew that for her, TikTok wasn't a natural sort of channel. And a natural sort of instinct, a natural content format. It took her quite a while to adopt TikTok, and for a while, her and her team, actively decided to not engage, not dedicate any time to the TikTok account because of a lack of resource, obviously, and because they had to prioritize, and because they realized that, as a platform overall is just not uh, it's not identifiable with the brand that they've created for Arlo. Um, so don't feel like you need to be, what I'm trying to say is don't feel like you need to be on every social media platform out there just because other people are. All right, the last step. Well, actually, this is not the last step. The fourth one is, on that flexibility tip. is to adapt, because over time your project will evolve, or you will evolve as a person, and so will people. Their habits, the marketing trends and tools and technologies out there will change in time. And so you have to change with them. If your brand identity lives largely through social media, it is then your responsibility to monitor the latest trends and changes that impact the platform algorithms and how your content reaches your fans. An example I can give here is McDonald's, right? McDonald's is not the brand that you would typically associate with eco-friendliness. On the contrary, however, they identify that, sustainability and climate change and environmentalism, and just a general surge in consumer interest in health and well-being, and eating healthy has led McDonald's to invest in a bit of a rebrand. And for some people, that may mean completely changing their logo and their visual identity. For them, it meant, that they were able to invest in the modernization of some of their restaurants. And again, restaurants that aren't typically associated with environmentalism. You could say the same thing about Starbucks, for example. They've really modernized, the most of their Starbucks coffee shops to create a more elevated experience, and really change the perception, particularly in America, that Starbucks is a lower tier coffee brand. So they're trying to turn it into more luxury, in the more luxury space. And how are they doing that? They're modernizing all of their coffee shops in some of the key sort of areas, key cities in the United States, and key neighborhoods in those key cities where there's a certain demographic that would consume and relate better with the luxury brand experience, more so than with the current McDonald's or Starbucks experience. So a perfect example of a large corporation adapting to new needs that their consumers didn't have, let's say, 10, 20 years or even 5 years ago. So if a big brand, a dinosaur brand like McDonald's can adapt an entire building, then surely us as artists, as individuals who operate in the music industry, must stay quite adaptable ourselves. Here, I wanted to give an example of an artist who is a former ASA alumna, Larissa, or Eyeife. Her artist project is called Eyeife. I haven't seen her in a while, but I remember seeing her perform one night when I was in Rio, and I was extremely impressed with the music, with her stage presence, with the visual sort of backdrop and overall experience that she's created with her performance that night. And here, these are some examples of photos that I've taken from her Instagram account, from different timelines. So they're, for different projects taken on different days, and yet you can see a bit of a recurring theme here. You can see that she's using this kaleidoscopic filter in both of these images. You can see that, she has a live setup. She is an artist who does her own live music performance. She does her own, electronics, her own gear. And you can kind of sense that she's an artist who has, even though, she has all these different tech gears all over, microphones, drums, very kind of technical things around her, you can kind of get a sense that there's something organic and natural about her performance, about her stage presence as well. These plants here, you have a candle and a Himalayan salt lamp. You have these little pampas here. to kind of create the impression of maybe nature. Um, and it's my knowledge that Aye is also an artist who blends electronic music with sounds from her indigenous tribe. I believe her grandmother belongs, comes from an indigenous tribe. And so she's incorporating um, their association with nature in her performance in order to allude, to her connection to her own roots as well. Similarly to what's the artist that we looked at earlier, Encita, that's the one. They're both kind of they're trying to communicate to their fans that there are these two sides to them, the indigenous, organic, sort of connected to the nature side, as well as the electronic, modern, feel to their music as well. So, regardless of what additional elements you might add or subtract, as an artist, I chose to focus on her live performance because obviously she plays all of those instruments herself, and it's a pretty strong, value. It's a unique value proposition to sell. But you don't have to do that. You might find that for you, it's the dancing. You might have a crew of 5 dancers behind you, and it's more about that aspect of your performance versus the instrumental part. If you just happen to be a singer and you don't do any of the instruments yourself. So just again, go back to that first step and investigating who you are. What is it that makes you you? And make sure that you take exactly those characteristics and you make use of them in your visual expression. You deliver that with a strong visual identity, with a unique voice, plus other ingredients that are unique to you. Your music, your podcast, your strategic ideas, etc. Here I wanted to give an example of Les Trucs. Let's play this video and hopefully you can also hear it. So Letrux is a very interesting artist and case study. She's completely independent and has been releasing her art for more than 10 years. In her performances, she blends music with poetry, performance, costume design, and so on to create a full Letrux experience. Her art has evolved over the years, adapting to the reality outside as well as her own inward world. But she's also kept certain elements constant. For example, the most consistent thing about the troops is the idea that she's a fierce woman who is not afraid to be herself. Um, and everything in her art and her brand communicates that. Her lyrics, her music, how she dances on stage, how she performs, um, and maybe even her choice of color. So, as a last step, stay consistent, deliver, repeat. So it's important, as I was saying, that you stay flexible to adapting, to changing over time, to reflect those changes that are happening inside of you as well as in the world. For your fans to be loyal to you, you need to be loyal to yourself, to your brand. We've already determined that consistency is key, and not only with your visual expression and materials, but also how you connect with your audience. So if you find them on Instagram, make sure that's where you are sharing on a regular basis. If you have a newsletter and you've realized that your fans love opening your newsletter, then make sure that you send out that newsletter on a weekly basis. If you have a presence on Twitter, make sure that you're on Twitter and you're part of conversations that your fans care about. Make sure that you respond back to your fans. I'm gonna talk a little bit about like Trux again because she's someone who's constantly playing with her creativity and introduces new elements in her performance or in her practice, although she's chosen some constants as well. The color red, for example, is an obvious recurring theme throughout the album shelf live, from album artwork through to makeup, costumes, merchandise, her website. This is an example of her website. You can see that all of these different visual expressions are part of the same theme. The color red, um, that express strength, and the color red is on her clothes, on her album artwork, and her visuals as she performs on stage in the background. You can see her in her content. Obviously, you you get the impression that red is not just a color that was strategically chosen to communicate something, but you can kind of get the feeling that she loves the color red. It's her, it's part of who she is, of her identity. All right, so as a final thing, because we're approaching the end, I have a worksheet for you to help you create your brand identity. You know, we've already discussed about the first step where you start with investigation and research and asking yourself those questions. Here are a few more questions that will help you create your personal brand. Knowing the answers to these questions will give you much more clarity about how to speak to both your audience and how to be present to yourself, as well as to press, fans, or clients. So some of these questions are: how would your friends, family, or people who know you best describe your personality? How they describe your music or work? How does their social media presence look like? If you were a major Twitter celebrity, who would you be? Is there another artist company or initiative that does similar work to yours? Who are they? Oh, let's see that this question is repeated, so I'll delete it from up here. What do you want your brand to say about you? What's your dream venue, client, or partner? Again, these are just some of the questions that you can get started with, in addition to the ones that I put at the beginning. And you can scroll back to the beginning of the video to find them. And getting the answers to these questions will help you in your brand identity exercise. So that was it. I will leave you on a quote by Bernadette Chiva, who is an author. She's a branding strategist expert and the author of this book called The Story of Telling. She says, "We spend most of our time trying to make people love things when we should be simply making things that people love." That's pretty powerful statement there. I'll leave you with it to as some food for thought. And I thank you so much for your time today. Please visit our website at www.shesaid.so to get more information about my work over there for women in the music industry. And I look forward to connecting with you at another time.